Matt, good to see you.
Thank you.
How have the last few months been?
Yeah, busy. Busy because we welcomed our third child to the world. Little Connor's doing fantastically well. So busy in relation to their sleepless nights and changing nappies and trying to be a supportive parent and husband. But also then in terms of watching as many games as I can. It's ramped up certainly in the last few weeks and the last couple of months in relation to watching all levels, all standards, and getting a real feel for where the leagues are, and hopefully we'll be going back into work. Obviously watched a lot of League One and a lot of League Two, where I've worked predominantly as a manager myself, but touched upon the Championship, National League and a little bit in Scotland as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for a lot of managers, the time out of work can be really valuable because they get a chance to maybe look at football in a different way than you might do in the Saturday to Tuesday grind.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a valuable experience watching games cold, if that makes sense.
Sure, yeah.
Where you sat in a stand with no next thought in terms of the opposition or scouting a player. You're just watching the game of football, and it's been excellent because obviously the level's very similar to what I've worked in previously. The game hasn't changed much in relation to that. So I've really tried to study the people, obviously the players on the pitch first and foremost, the staff, the coaches and managers, but get a bit better understanding of what the fans want, what entertainment looks like, because society is changing a little bit and the game of football is seen in a slightly different way. But what I've tried to really do in the last sort of few months especially is just to get a real feel for where fans are at in terms of what they want their team to look like, and that's something I'll be using when I go back into work.
I suppose you'd also be using, when you go back into work, influences from your early life and your playing career, upbringing in Chorley, of course, as well, Cotton Town and in Lancashire. What kind of values have been sort of imposed on you that you've brought into management?
Yeah, the values which are set out by your family, irrelevant of where you're brought up really, it's those around you. Fantastic parents, passionate about football, passionate about sports, passionate about being out and moving and spending time outdoors as much as you possibly can. My grandfather was a professional footballer, was a coach, was a manager, worked as a scout for Manchester United. My uncle played professional football as well, and I have got an older brother who played football as well, and that really pushed me to want to play first and foremost, and then probably pushed me in terms of my not professionalism at an early age, but my understanding of what will bring success. And obviously when you've got an older brother, you aspire to be just like them. I'm going through it with my children at the moment and seeing it firsthand. You copy everything they do. So I had some fantastic role models, but our parents were brilliant in terms of not just the support they gave us and the guidance, but taking us here, there and everywhere. And the Northwest is special in terms of the amount of clubs, community clubs to start with, and then moving into the professional game as well. So yeah, I had a really good upbringing in relation to that. Not straightforward by any means, because I didn't sign a professional contract at 16 like a lot of footballers do. I went down a slightly different route in relation to that, but I certainly feel that better served me in future life.
Yeah, you mentioned your brother there. I think you played with him for Burscough. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Burscough, yeah.
Burscough. In the FA Trophy final, Aston Villa played at Villa Park when you were 400-1 underdogs, I believe, for that competition.
Yeah, it was an incredible journey. It was a non-league fairy tale, really. You've got to imagine it as a team from possibly bottom end of the Championship, if not League One, winning the FA Cup. That was the equivalent of what it was at non-league level. And across that campaign, we weren't a particularly strong league team, but we had this incredible cup run. We went to Yeovil, who were actually the National League champions at the time.
Under Gary Johnson.
And we won 2-0 away from home. And then to finish at Villa Park with Sean Teal as our player manager was just so special. It was almost as if it was meant to be. But then that connection of me being playing in goal at that time and my brother playing in the back line for Burscough probably made it extra special for the family.
Certainly did. Which managers, you mentioned Sean Teal there, which managers have you looked at in your career and sort of thought, I want to take a bit of that into my own managerial career?
Well, you don't know it when you're doing it, especially when you're playing. I go back to my parents and the influence they had on me, my grandparents and my brother, which we spoke about. From an early age, I had a fantastic coach at college, a guy called Jeff Caffey, who was a disciplinary PE teacher, but very humble in terms of his approach to football, and taught me incredible standards as a teenager, which I think you really need. And then playing non-league all those years under John Davison to start with, and then obviously we had a bit of success under Sean Teal, and then various managers in that non-league circuit. But then in the professional game, obviously playing for 4 years under Paul Tisdale. Was an incredible experience to start with, and probably exactly what I needed when I was just starting out in the game, because I was wet behind the ears. I thought I could cope at certain levels, but he really guided me through it, protected me when he needed to protect me, but then pushed me to new levels alongside other players at that football club. Because I was 24 when I started, it didn't matter because I was going in at a later age. He still treated me as a young player and gave me that development time and time to grow, and I ended up being his captain. We had great success at Exeter, and then the different characters moving on from Paul, Chrissy Powell at Charlton, whose people skills were second to none, Phil Parkinson at Bradford, and then I think there was 4 or 5 different managers at Cheltenham and Newport in a short space of time. So seeing the good and the bad along the way, but taking little snippets from each and every one of them, but also staying authentic. That's one thing you learn pretty quickly in Managerial. You have to be yourself. You can't act like other people. You can't see the game like other people. You can learn and obviously take the best bits, but you've got to stay true to yourself.
Certainly have. When you left Exeter City as manager, I remember your statement that said to the fans, you took a Southern League oil tanker to your hearts. Yeah. And I wondered if there was a story behind that.
Well, I don't know if it was the local press or a forum or a website, or someone had referred to me as a Southern League oil tanker. Probably because how slow I was on the term, which is absolutely correct. I wasn't mobile in terms of my playing days, but I had a certain skill set. I was strong physically and good in the air. And I was a good voice and a good sort of platform for the rest of the team to build off at the back. I'd like to think I was good in both boxes, but whoever said that or wrote that was absolutely right. And it was something which is always, certainly by my family and friends first and foremost, used to take the mickey out of me, but then always stuck as something which was something to look back on, probably at the start of my Exeter career, and then obviously what we achieved together. We had 2 promotions in 2 years at Exeter City, and then stayed up last day of the season in League One, and then finished the highest the club's ever been. And then leaving after that 4 years felt the right time to leave as a player, and then going back in a coaching capacity and then a managerial capacity. And same again, 4 and a bit years later, it felt like the right time to move on and the right time to leave. And both times I felt that I've left the club in a better place than when I actually joined the football club in both capacities. And it's a club which will always be fun with me.
Yeah, well, that's all you can ask for, isn't it? To leave a club in a better place, and you've certainly done that. I wanted to come back to Paul Tisdale because as much as he's done some amazing work over a long period of time, I think about 12 years for Exeter City, there's possibly a feeling that maybe in some quarters he didn't get the credit he deserved. Is that a feeling that you'd have from a playing capacity?
Yeah, absolutely, because we saw how difficult it was, and we were part of how difficult it was. Exeter City, at the start of Paul's tenure to the end of his tenure, the club grew a lot, and he made a lot of sacrifices. He was so unselfish in terms of the way he went about his work, and we spoke already about his vision and his brilliance with younger players and developing them, and that came at a cost because young players are inconsistent. I've gone through that experience myself as a manager, but Exeter City was a club which needed that to happen. It had to happen for it to survive, and also for it to grow in the way that he envisaged. And he was absolutely brilliant in terms of his control and his management of that football club. Football fans and the wider public always want things straight away. And sometimes Paul was more patient because he saw a bigger picture. And football fans are naturally tribal in some ways, and they want to see people showing passion in different ways. And Paul was so calm and measured, and that's something we spoke about which maybe was held against him at times. But he cared, he really cared, and we saw it on a daily basis. We saw it behind closed doors where he really let that emotion out, but he was just so measured on the touchline that maybe some fans and some people in the wider public saw that as a lack of passion. I can guarantee it certainly wasn't.
Yeah, it's just passion in a different way, perhaps channeled differently. I think I'd spoken to Sammy Parkin about his time under Paul, and one thing he said was that a lot of the decisions, in-game decisions, were actually decided meticulously before the game. So this wasn't instinct decisions, or I'm feeling this and I'm going to do. It's actually if this is the way that we're going to go, I'm going to do this. If this is the way the game goes, I'm going to do this. But everything seemed to be decided before the games.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I left Exeter City with was not only experience but flexibility within my game. We could flip from a back 3 to a back 4 several times in a game, several times and a half at times, just to respond. And because Paul knew his players, and he knew what they could do. Knowing the capabilities of your playing squad and the team out on the pitch is so important as a manager, and Paul certainly knew that. And sometimes it was to counteract the opposition, sometimes it was to inject a little bit of energy and life into the team and then their own performance. So it was all dependent on the way the game was going out. But similar to what we've just spoke about, he was able to do that because he was so clear in his mind and so concentrated. And the fact that he was there for such a long period of time, and he built this squad over time and again, he was able to do it at an instance, and it wasn't a big effect on the actual playing group. Sometimes mentally a playing group can struggle if there's too many changes, but it almost became the norm for ourselves as players. We joke about it, we talk about it, but we were so flexible in our ways, and it helped us overachieve. That Exeter City team, which I was in, the promotions and staying up in League One and the subsequent finish, overachieved, and that was down to Paul and his brilliance.
Certainly was. At what point in your career did you start thinking, I would like to stay in the game as a coach or as a manager?
Well, similar to what we spoke about, because my route into the game was slightly different. I suppose I always had half an eye on when my body would give up, or I wasn't good enough to play the professional game. Signing your first professional contract at 24, and then that was National League level at Exeter City at that point. Allowed me to go to college and university first and foremost, to get certain qualifications even before going into the game, but also probably made me think about it a little bit more and a little bit more resilient to certain moments, but also an understanding that I'm going to need something not to fall back on, but another passion other than playing. And the sort of player I was, injuries came, and even when you think you're Superman, you're not. You can't always play injured or get back from injuries in a record amount of time. And it started to take its toll. And probably when I left Charlton and first got a serious foot injury at Bradford, I knew that, well, I certainly knew when the surgeon said you've got a limited amount of time before the nail and what's holding that joint together will sort of be damaged in a longer term process. I knew I needed to look further afield in terms of my future education and future work in the game. Once you've played the game, you want to stay in the game. And I certainly wanted to do that. And moving from Bradford to Cheltenham was a big moment because it allowed me to get some coaching experience down at Hartbury College, working in their senior football programme there. I did that alongside playing full-time at Cheltenham and then Newport. Got the Masters on top of that and all the qualifications which UEFA provide and then the FA provides. And then got the opportunity to work back with Paul. There was no moment where I thought, right, I want to be a manager. But having that first 4 years at Exeter City, I suppose I grew into a leadership role. And once you become a leader in a change room and a captain, you always put in that bracket, rightly so, because you obviously show leadership qualities whether you got the armband or not. So every change room I went into after that, I was seen as not an elder statesman, but an experienced one who's got leadership qualities. And there's a natural gravitation towards you from players, from staff, from managers, from board members, from supporters, if you've got that skill set. And it's something which I felt suited me. And I was passionate about coaching, and I loved my time coaching. But as I was coaching, I still wanted my own team for it to be just my name on the back of it. And all the decisions would come back to me. A lot of coaches out there are fantastic coaches, but they've got the protection of someone ahead of them or someone above them to offload at the moments. I almost wanted the pressure of that's your team and your responsibility. And luckily I got that opportunity.
Certainly did. Was it quite daunting stepping into Paul's shoes in your first season as a manager?
Yes, but you don't have time to think about that. You don't, even more so on that little part of that journey where we got to the playoff final, being beaten. So the league season was extended, and then there was a small period of time where the decisions were made in relation to Paul's future, and obviously him going to MK Dons and taking some of the staff with him and players and so on and so forth. So there was no real time to sit down and think, this guy's been there for 12 years. What a daunting task this is. It was a challenge, but a fantastic challenge and one that I wanted and one that I felt I was ready for in relation to the club, because not only did I know Paul, I knew the football club. I probably had a few extra bits of credit in the bank, having played there and the success and having the service I'd given to the football club. So I felt I had a good handle on where I could take the club and where we could almost go on a new journey, knowing full well how difficult it was going to be when you replace any manager, let alone one who's been there for 12 years. But I also felt by being present and coaching, I knew the playing squad and I knew what the squad needed. So it it was daunting, but it was straight to work, and you don't really have time to put anything, not negative in your mind, but anything where you can go into a cycle of overthinking it.
You just got to attack the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one thing that I did notice about your first season, which was the year before the player final, obviously, was that you got some really good loans retrospectively. Kane Wilson, Chirag Bene and Dara O'Shea have all since gone on to play in the top 2 divisions. So talk to me about working with somebody like Marcus Flitcroft as head of recruitment and the work that he does.
Yeah, I mean, part of the story is there was no head of recruitment at the time at Exeter City.
Right, okay.
You know, Marcus was our head analyst, but a fantastic human being first and foremost. And we used our experience of basically marking and watching. We watched so many games in preparation when we were part of the coaching group that we had a good bank of players to look at and names to go off. And we did that from the start. But then certainly in the loan market, at that time, we were very inexperienced because we hadn't seen these players play live. We had connections at certain football clubs, and then it goes to trust to certain coaches. And we were probably lucky in some respects in terms of loans you've just mentioned. But we got a lot right in terms of our recruitment, and there's a skill set to it, of course there is. But we went on character first and foremost. So that's something which I'll always do as a manager. You give me the right character, and then I feel I can get the best out of them as players. And that's absolutely massive. And sometimes a little bit of luck is involved. But I look back at the first win that we had, where realistically we didn't quite know what we were doing. But we worked so hard together, and we gave it as much time as we possibly could and tried to get the balance of the squad right, that we got more right than wrong, and I was able to have a relatively successful season. That was a stronger squad than actually what we finished, but we lost Jaden Stockley in January. He had a clause in his contract. He was our leading goal scorer. I think he was on 16 at Christmas. He would have finished over 30, which...
All of them were headed goals.
Yes, yeah. And also in terms of the style of play, we couldn't replace him.
Yeah.
We couldn't replace him in that manner of, you know, if you cross the ball to Jaden, more times than not, he put the ball in the back of the net at that level of football. So we had to find a different route to goal from that point on. Made it difficult the second half of the season. We finished a point outside the playoffs. But that was a big learning curve in terms of how quickly the team can be affected by one player. We weren't one-dimensional by any means, but he was such a big player for us. So much learning in such a short space of time, but it's obviously served us in good stead for the future.
Yeah, certainly did. It felt like, talk me through the defeat to Northampton at Wembley in 2020 in the playoff final. I think you'd beaten Colchester in the semis that year, but this was one behind closed doors. So on the one hand, it's a strange feeling in the first place, sort of going to Wembley and seeing, you know, not seeing the Exeter City fans there like they did in previous playoff finals under Paul, but also obviously the disappointment of the performance on the day.
Yeah, I mean that season. I mean, I almost put my Exeter City management career into 2 brackets or 2 parts. The first one was pre-COVID, and then, you know, that second season we were generally in the top 3 for the majority of the season.
It was such a good league though, that season.
League.
Like 5 really good teams that year.
And if the season had been suspended 2 weeks previously, we would have got automatic promotion. That's sometimes a little bit of luck in football, but credit to the teams who got promoted at that time. But then this huge thing happened in terms of COVID, where no one knew really what was not just going on, but how to act in terms of the footballing world and what was going to happen, whether we'd get to finish the season and what that would look like. Quickly became apparent that they wanted to play the playoffs, and anyone who watched the first game at Colchester, because it was our first experience of a COVID game, so to speak, it was the worst game of football I think possibly I've ever managed.
It was Archie Collins passing to Nigel Attingana for me.
Well, it was a brutal game, but for both teams. Colin Bramall scored a late free kick for Colchester, and we were going into the second leg 1-0 down. It was just a new experience and totally different to anything anyone's ever experienced at all. I'll always talk about my highlights on the pitch in terms of promotion at Exeter City and keeping Rotherham in a championship from a managerial point of view, but from a person point of view, what I learned about myself and others in terms of management and leadership capacity during COVID was absolutely massive. And I feel we came together as a football club. People say you had no choice, and that was the way of life then. And it doesn't seem that long ago, but it was so new, and like I say, no one quite knew how to guide each other through it, but we found a way. And
you hadn't played for 3 months, is that right?
I hadn't played for 3 months. Weren't able to play behind closed doors because we couldn't get opposition in. Trained in COVID scenarios and situations where there were little pockets of 5 players at a time, and you know, it was incredible.
Wearing masks,
and you know, not allowed in the buildings and in a marquee. and no other staff around. It was surreal. It was absolutely surreal. But it brought us together in a new way, and it also helped me understand who I could trust from a player's perspective, because we couldn't coach them or keep them fit with interaction with them, and they had to do it almost online. Some came back in fantastic shape, others didn't, but then staff as well, who I could really count on and trust. And we played fantastically well in the second leg, the semi-final, beat Colchester convincingly. And then
was that Alex Fisher scoring?
Alex Fisher, Ryan Bowman scored the winner in the sort of last minute of extra time. And then you go to Wembley, which it should be the biggest day of your sporting career. I played there, so I had an idea of the build-up towards it, but this was just totally different. And walking out of Wembley, even when there's 40,000, it's half full, which I'd experienced as a player. Walking out with no one and just hearing the noise of the game and the voices was different. And we were well beaten by Northampton. They physically dominated that day, and we couldn't quite handle it. And it was such a shame that was a reflection on our season, because that team...
You'd beaten Plymouth Argyle 4-0 that year.
Yeah, that team probably deserved more. It did. But on any given day, anyone can beat any team. And full credit to Keith Cole and Northampton. They did a real job on us that day. But it also meant that group of players who'd been through so much in that sort of 3 and 4 month period, now it was a moment where we had to rebuild and almost make decisions as a football club as to what was next. And that was the big part of my second part at Exeter City, was how we went even further down the youth aspect than we ever had done before. Because we had a season behind closed doors where we just played the young players no matter what, and then we got the fruits of the labour, almost, so to speak, the following season. Yeah,
I can see actually why you'd split it into 2 categories, because it was like across those 2 years you needed the first year to blood Josh Key, Alex Hartridge, other than Archie Collins, names like that, Jack Sparks, to kind of give them the opportunities to go on and do. Very difficult to hold them to those promotion standards in the first season where they're of regular football. So I imagine that developmental year was important.
It was almost a perfect season to do it, because there's always scrutiny. The game is a game of opinions.
Of course.
But there was no fans in the stadium to add any extra pressure on this group of young players. And with young players, you get the inconsistencies. And added pressure to younger players can become, be difficult, and they can struggle in different ways. But we just played them that season, and there were other players as well. We got to the point where every single game was over 50% of the starting team and over 50% of the squad being academy products. And it also meant that at the end of that season, financially, we sold Joe Randall to Peterborough for over £1 million. But then financially, the way we could offset the budget to a few more marquee key players to come in and not just supplement it, but strengthen that playing group for a promotion push the following season was huge. Those homegrown talents, not only are they assets, but the value they give in terms of their wages and the time and the effort they give you, second to none. And Dan Green had been under-18s manager before myself when he became first-team coach. He knew that group from a young age. I'd worked with him in a 21s capacity. We knew him better than anyone else, and we felt we could get the best out of them and continue their development in a sort of more pressurised environment of League Two football with fans finally watching it. And they performed so well in that promotion season.
What's the key, do you think, Matt, to getting maximum value for top young players? Because it's something that I feel Exeter City have done well over the last decade or so, where I've seen clubs like, I'll give Crewe Alexandra an example, who have had similar talent, but they've struggled to extract the value because it's like they've signed contracts, but under the agreement that the release clause is going to be very low, so you can keep them in their senior years, but you're not going to get the big fees. Why do you think Exeter City have been able to earn those?
Time and effort.
Really?
Yeah. You invest in your young players, and you give them the opportunity to grow. Like I say, football, a game of opinions and strong opinions, and very rarely do you get a young player playing on a first-team pitch at senior football who just plays well week in, week out, and is consistent in terms of their performance. It doesn't happen. If it does, they'd probably moved on from you before that moment. So you have to understand that when they have that little lull or a little drop in form or physically need a little bit of a break, how you support them through it. Because then when they come back, they come back better and stronger and in a better place mentally from having experienced it. That's a hard thing to do as a first-team manager, because we spoke about your name being on the team and your responsibility. If the team's results almost slightly weaker off the back of playing younger players, you've got to be strong enough to take that. So the collective understanding of what Exeter City is was massive, and it's still massive in relation to their understanding of the importance of academy players, and then seeing what they can become as well. It's all well and good giving the time and effort, but understanding their growth patterns, their pathway, how long you'll need to give them, and what they need alongside them, and then getting the balance in terms of the seniority and the strength elsewhere, because they've all got weaknesses, and if you're going to offset some of those weaknesses or protect them in some way by setting up a team, you give them a chance to perform. And like I say, that promotion season will be so memorable for a lot of ways, because the fans came back in. They saw a team which was made up of Exeter City youngsters, nothing better than homegrown talent, and they're one of our own, so to speak. But the way they played and the energy they played with, we weren't the best playing group, nowhere near. But the way we played as a team was absolutely fantastic, and we were able to add a few players in certain positions to add a little bit extra to the dynamic of the group. But I'll go back to what it was: time and effort, and those young players will give you everything as long as you give them everything.
Just coming back to the issue of recruitment, which is something, again, I think you did particularly well in that final season. Somebody like Tim Dieng, who was Player of the Year, or very close to that with Matt Jay that season, he had actually been relegated with previous clubs, but he was one of the, he was one of the good ones, if you like. But that takes a certain level of detail in the recruitment to be able to identify that player in a team that's not necessarily performing very well. So talk us through that process.
Yeah, first and foremost, understanding what you've got in the building, and then when you go outside and externally, you have to understand what you want to bring in. And we needed a physical midfielder. We needed a physical midfielder who could score goals, who was outstanding in both boxes. We knew that we had enough control in possession to allow Tim to play his natural game, which is running to goal at certain times and then running to defend your goal when needed.
Because you got Colo in there.
Because we've got Archie Collins, we've got Matt Jay, we invested in Giovanni Brown as well, who came towards the ball as opposed to away from the ball. And we were a crossing team. We had great delivery from Josh Key and Peace, one side, Jake Caprice, Jack Sparks, Alex Hartridge, Jake Diabate, the other side. We were able to create crossing moments, and there's no one better. We spoke about Jaden Stockley at the start of my tenure at Exeter City. Tim Dieng was fantastic meeting the ball. And coming from midfield, he was harder to pick up, and he was physically stronger than a lot of midfielders. It was almost having an extra centre forward of a physical nature in an attacking moment and an extra centre half in a defensive capacity. But also going into the due diligence, which we do in terms of recruitment, Marcus Flitcroft, I remember speaking to Nicky Law about Tim Dieng. Nicky is someone who played with him at Bradford, and then Tim had gone on to get relegated at Bradford and then Southend, and found himself out of the league and out of contract, so to speak. But Nicky spoke highly of him, and Nicky Law was someone I still trust now in terms of his opinion. He knows the game. He probably knew what Tim would do for myself and the team. So there's that aspect, but then we kept him fit all season. Tim generally has had the odd injury throughout his time in terms of disrupting his season, and it takes him a little bit of time to get back up to speed. Generally, we had a group who stayed fit that season, and that's that little bit of luck you need on top of the expertise and the brilliance of recruitment.
Certainly is. And then just talk us through that moment. It was a Tuesday night game, wasn't it, where you beat, was it Barrow?
Barrow.
Beat to secure promotion. That must have been a pride moment, and 4 years of work all came down to that moment. Yeah,
like I said, I'd split it into two halves. It was almost 18 months of work coming to that moment, especially with that group of players. Another difficult game for the supporters to watch in terms of the pressure on it and what it meant. And we'd been on such a good run post-Christmas that season that at that point, I generally, with 3 games to go in the season, needing 3 points, I generally thought we would do it. But then I think they scored direct from a throw early on in the first half, and it was a terrible goal to concede, and it kind of sucked the life out of the stadium like it does, and the players just looked a little bit nervy for the first time that all season. And there's got this huge prize waiting for you at the end of it, and you stood there as a manager and you just try and get the support and the messages onto that group of players. And towards the end of that first half, we scored a hugely deflected goal, and that was a little bit of luck going in our way, which we probably deserved, but that was a moment, and all of a sudden the fans go up and the players' shoulders were back and the chest was out a little bit more. And second half, we just pushed and pushed and pushed, and the moment came to our captain, Matt Jay, and it fell to him, and there was no one better to score that winning goal. And then the moment that goal went in, knowing what we had from a character and defensive capacity, I knew we were where we needed to be. I knew we were there, but you have to keep your professional head on for the final, what felt like a lifetime, which was only 10 minutes. But then to see the scenes at the end, incredible. And I've never been an emotional character, everyone knows that about me. But deep down, there was something inside where I just wanted to go to my wife and give her a hug, and my parents were there, and also spend time with that group of players and my staff who had been through a lot, and they'd been through a journey together, and it was such a special end.
So it's 2022, in around October time. You'd had a good start to life in League One with Exeter City after promotion, and you got the Rotherham United job. Was it, we spoke about this a little bit earlier, but was it a wrench to leave Exeter City, a club that you'd had 8 years combined associated with?
Yeah, it was difficult to leave, and not only from a professional point of view, from a personal point of view. We just had our first child down there. He was 6 weeks old. We'd made a life. My wife had moved from Cardiff, Irish girl originally, down to Exeter, and we loved living there. We really did. And you're not just leaving the football club, but you're leaving a social network and a social strength, and a group of people who not only have you worked alongside, that you've worked for, and we built something which was special. And we started League One fantastically well, and that was an exciting team in League One, let alone when we won promotion from League Two. So difficult to leave the players, the staff, the club, but also that social network, which is, been so huge for us as a family.
Certainly was. I think Rotherham had had a good start after they'd won promotion themselves the year before under Paul Warne, and Warne got the Derby job. But was it Victor Johansson that was you felt was key, and Cam Humphreys, I think you had to Rotherham, that achievement of staying in the Championship?
Yeah, I mean, going into it, people told me how difficult it was going to be, because history at Rotherham United was relegation from the Championship, promotion from League One, but then relegation from the Championship. It happened the three previous occasions where they'd been promoted fantastic from League One, but then relegated from the Championship. And I knew the manager had left to go to a League One club. All his staff had left to go to a League One club. We spoke about where I was in the pecking order in relation to getting that job. We know other people had turned that job down. It wasn't an attractive job at Championship level, because of the understanding how difficult it was for that group of players and that squad we had to stay in the Championship. Like everything in life, I saw it as a challenge, and a fantastic challenge, but also a challenge at the level where I wanted to work at. So I knew that no matter what was going to happen, I was going to see Championship firsthand. I had a slight experience of playing in it, but I was never really good enough to play Championship level football. But now to be stood on the touchline and to manage it, I knew no matter what happened, that was going to be a fantastic experience, and the biggest challenge I'd faced professionally. And what we achieved in that first season was incredible, and to finish fifth bottom, it sounds such a negative when you say success is avoiding relegation, and I put my footballing achievements in certain orders. That was my biggest footballing achievement as a manager, bigger than the promotion at Exeter City, bigger than building that squad. Just on the pitch to stay in the league at Championship level with Rotherham United was my biggest achievement, and it was done with honesty, hard work, and a group of players who gave me absolutely everything. We were short in so many departments against our opposition, but we weren't short in terms of spirit in that second half of the season. And you mentioned Victor Johansson. He was probably the best goalkeeper, turned into the best goalkeeper in the league that season, our standout player, and he's grown to be such a fantastic goalkeeper at club level and now international level as well. Fantastic person, fantastic character, and a great goalkeeper. And then other ones to mention as well. You mentioned Cam Humphreys, Josie Ogbeni, we brought in John and Hugo, Ollie Rathbone. There were so many I could go through who contributed. I'll never go back. I'll always go back in terms of the actual day we knew we were mathematically safe. Still with a game to spare. We beat Middlesbrough at home 1-0, and Hakeem Adoffin scored a goal from 25 yards out. But various things happened that day, which was the pattern for the whole of my tenure at Rotherham, and it still happens now at that club at Championship level. Josie Ogbeni went off injured in the first half. Shane Ferguson was playing with his groin literally hanging off, and carried on going until it literally tore in front of our own eyes, and he couldn't continue. That was a real example. They were willing to go above and beyond, and we had to, just to compete at Championship level. And we beat Middlesbrough. We're going into the playoffs, so we beat Middlesbrough and then drew with Wigan our final game, to finish over 50 points and to finish, like I say, in 18th, 19th position. People think, oh, you've avoided relegation, well done. People don't quite understand the magnitude of that.
It's framed differently, isn't it? I think winning a promotion, even if staying up is an even bigger achievement, I think winning a promotion feels more like a it gets recognised.
There's celebrations.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a TV. There's a press coverage. We'd stayed up, and there's this monumental effort, and then that was it.
Yeah.
And I remember we held a celebration at the stadium on the pitch. We got players, families there. We got staff families there. We paid for it ourselves. We got bouncy castles there. We got we got people there. We tried to make it something special at the end, because the players didn't have that and they deserved it. They weren't going to get an open top bus through the streets of Rotherham, and rightly so, because we hadn't got promoted. But we'd achieved something which hadn't been achieved for such a long period beforehand, and against all odds. So the players probably deserved more recognition, and from a selfish point of view as well. As much as a lot of people warned me off that job at that point, when I took the job, so many people said you won't get better than this at Rotherham when we kept them up. And so many people said, and now would be the time to resign. But I had a young family, I had another child on the way. I had to think financially, but also in terms of where you are in your mindset as a character. I'd started to build something, and I wanted to continue that. Didn't really get the opportunity to do that, but it was interesting to look back on, because we're going to get future experiences where people will give you good advice and people give you bad advice. But in those moments, people, when they said that to me, I didn't really take it on board. We just had this massive achievement. I was, couldn't wait for what was next. So many people probably guided me in a slightly different way, but so many people who knew the game said sensible things to me.
Did you relish the opportunity to kind of network with some high-end managers like Vincent Kompany, who's now Bayern Munich boss, Carlos Corberán, who now manages Valencia? Did you sort of network with Championship managers and gain some ideas from them?
It'd be wrong for me to say we networked. We don't. You come across each other on the touchline. You respect each other's work. You're competitors, so we would have run-ins with certain coaches and certain managers, and you wanted to beat them. But then after the game, you'd always sit down and have a drink. And I wish I could spend longer in those moments, because to just get a little bit of insight in terms of the way they think, their thought processes, the way they saw the game. Some are fantastic in terms of how open they are. But those moments, and you have to understand that you're probably huddled together in a small office. We certainly were at Rotherham, with very little in terms of what to give them and what to produce them and what to serve to them, other than conversation. But fantastic to be in the same place as them. And Vincent Kompany had a fantastic team at Burnley. We pushed them so hard in the game at Turf Moor, and then got a point at home. Not many teams did that.
No.
We scored 4 goals against them. Not many teams did that. We beat West Brom at home 3-1 comfortably. And we were able to get our home form going, where we just attacked teams and really sort of physically dominated and pressed them really well and disrupted them, and scored the set-piece goals off the back of that. And had a bit of a home formula, and a lot of people really complimented us on that. Corberán, like you just mentioned, they spoke about our press and how much pressure we put on them. So yeah, part of it is ego related, but yeah, just fantastic sharing the touchline and seeing your team go up against these fantastic coaches and managers.
I've got a feeling I know the answer to this question, but why do you think, with the start to the following campaign, you maybe weren't quite able to build on the template? I mean, I imagine financial disparity was a huge aspect to that.
It was. But also, I do feel we were still building at that point. There were so many things I spoke about how difficult the season before. Nothing changed in terms of the injury record. Nothing changed in terms of so many of our signings not being able to play consistent level at Championship, in the Championship. The league got stronger. That's one thing I have to allude to. The leagues always go through cycles, and the 3 teams from League One were strong teams. 3 teams coming down from the Premier League were incredibly strong. So all of a sudden, 6 monsters came into the league. So the league naturally got stronger. When I got sacked, we were 3rd from bottom, and we were probably only 3 points away from where we needed to be, which was a point a game. I always worked on that ratio. It sounds so negative to say it, as a football manager, but a point a game at Championship level at Rotherham would give you a really good chance at staying in the league. So we were only 3 points away from that, and I kind of felt I knew where those 3 points lay in the games we played. It was a home game against Blackburn. How a refereeing decision or some moments in the game cost us a couple of points on that occasion. Last minute goal against Bristol City. So, there were points we'd left out there, and I felt that would turn in terms of getting them back in the second half of the season. And so many of the players I'd brought in on top of what we had the previous season weren't quite up to Championship speed as yet. And they were learning, and their bodies were adapting. And, that was part of the process of being a Rotherham United manager. I felt like we just needed a little bit more time to get that team fully functioning and fully firing. And were we really underperforming that badly? That's, we speak about a game of opinions. That's the way it goes sometimes. But then what happened after that would suggest we weren't doing too bad.
Sure. How did you find navigating your relationship with a very front-footed owner, I suppose, in Tony Stewart and navigating that relationship?
Yeah, look, I look back on my part in that. You'll know from judging from this conversation the way I speak.
Sure.
Very straight, very honest, and I probably was too straight and too honest. And one thing I certainly look back on is I tried to improve the infrastructure of the football club, something which hadn't been done previously. I wanted adequate facilities. I didn't want the best. I wanted enough in terms of players could come into the training ground and their working environment and our working environment and be well fed, well looked after staff-wise, well looked after in terms of gym facilities, have hot showers, train on safe pitches, something you'd probably think happens at every single professional football club but didn't at the time at Rotherham United. And so I pushed probably some buttons which maybe hadn't been pushed before and were seen as the way I spoke about these areas of investment and the need for them was seen as a little bit of a negative against me.
Right.
Because football is one thing on the pitch, but I try to grow a bigger entity at Rotherham in terms of the infrastructure there, which has started to improve, obviously, since as time's gone on. But if you don't get the results on the pitch to go alongside it, those decisions and those things you are pushing often gets questioned. And I'm not saying it was held against me, but probably the way I spoke, I should have done it with a slightly softer tongue. Yeah,
it makes kind of, it's a question that I've been thinking in terms of leadership and people management. How much of it is about honesty and authenticity, and how much of it is about pragmatism and navigating relationships with certain outcomes in mind?
Yeah, you have to have a strength in understanding each other, understanding oneself. Like I say, I'm so stubborn in certain moments that I certainly feel that the way of working and once we make a decision towards something, it gets done sooner rather than later. But other people don't always see it that way, and that's absolutely fine. We have to understand each other. And you just alluded to it there. Building relationships, and the most important relationship for a manager is with the chairman. And if that relationship becomes difficult, then you're always going to be in trouble, because the moment the pitch doesn't go your way, then like I say, it's going to be a difficult time for you, and you need each other's support. So looking back, I have to find a softer approach to certain conversations while still trying to get the right outcome. It wasn't for me. Everything I pushed at Rotherham United was for the players, and of course that's partly for yourself as manager, but the staff, to be able to attract better players, keep them fit for longer, have a better product on the pitch, better performance. Everything I thought was important or felt was important wasn't just my opinion. It was kind of the game telling me that as well, alongside the players and everyone else who came to the training ground. But I have to understand that when I left, and honest conversations with the chairman, I knew that I'd pushed a few buttons which felt a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, and then I suppose it comes back to choosing owners and choosing clubs where you're confident the environment is going to suit your way of working, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, the unicorn ownership model doesn't exist. Exeter City is probably as close to it as you can, because you get given a number, and that is your number as a manager. That is the budget, whatever you see fit in terms of that budget, and use it how you want, whether it's staff, players, facilities. But that is the number, don't go over it. Make sure you're under it, and then if you can supplement it by selling players on, absolutely fantastic. Ever since Exeter City, or since leaving Exeter City, there's a wider world of football where not everything is in your control, and it's certainly got to be. I think it's probably a bit of a to be topic at the moment. You probably look at the Norwich City example.
Sure.
Is the fans' anger and frustration just towards the manager? He's probably going towards a sporting director and the board. Probably Rangers and Celtic, you're seeing it in Scotland as well. I think a lot of fans now are probably understanding that the product on the pitch isn't just the manager's responsibility.
Yeah.
And I keep using the word manager. No one's a manager anymore. They're all head coaches.
Yeah.
And the moment this new title for what I think are managers came in, then those, not red flags, but those worrying signs start to come that it's not your team on the football, or not just your team on a football pitch, and a lot of other things have gone into putting that product out there.
I mean, I don't know if I see that as entirely a negative. I think it's the big thing is the relationship between the manager or head coach and the sporting director / director of football. Because I think if they've got a really trusting relationship where they speak every day and one knows what the other wants and needs, and the head coach can profile the players and the sporting director can look at the details, I don't think we have a problem, because sometimes a lot of coaches now actually want the freedom to just get on with coaching on the grass, and putting all their energy into that. So I don't think it's just a negative. But the problem comes, of course, when players get put on you and all that kind of stuff, which is when you get into a different territory.
Yeah, and then there's a plan behind the plan. There's a strategy which would suggest at various football clubs that we're going down we're signing these players from a data model or data program or analytics, away from the scouting network or the coaches or managers' eyes. Management, head coach positions about getting the balance together. People talk about putting that jigsaw together, and we spoke about it a little bit at Exeter City and how we were able to do that, and luck is always involved. But generally, when you're putting a group of players out there for the world to see and the world to judge, you want it to be in a reflection of you, or you want them to be a reflection of you. And that's certainly something which I feel football has come away from slightly, where a lot of different decision makers, a lot of different stakeholders, a lot of people getting involved, and that's absolutely fine and understandable because they make investment. But why would you employ a position to be seen as a leader or a head coach who so-called has got that expertise at that level, so they should know what it takes to be successful, and then make it difficult for them to work or slightly go against them? And there's some fantastic football clubs, of course there is, but it's really interesting to experience it and to go through different models and to speak to other managers in the game who are finding the same challenges. And titles, we speak about titles, that's probably irrelevant. The key thing is that when you're stood on that touchline, you want it to be your team on that football pitch. That's when you feel comfortable and in control. And I don't think a lot of managers and head coaches have got that now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. With that in mind, how do you reflect on your 12 months or so at Bristol Rovers?
Well, similar to what we've alluded to. Challenges, very difficult. I was angry when I came out of Rotherham. For reasons we've spoke about. I didn't think we were that far behind where we needed to be, and I could see us getting closer to where having a better challenge, or a better chance of staying in the league. So I was angry. A couple of weeks went by, I'd had a couple of conversations, and I wanted to be working. I did. I think if I'd had a different emotion coming out of Rotherham, then maybe in hindsight I shouldn't have took the Bristol Rovers job. But I was angry. I was passionate and motivated to get back into it, and I went into a difficult situation at Bristol Rovers, and for that 12 months, like we spoke about, I've never felt in control, which is such a strange thing to say. We had 2 transfer windows, but never once did I really felt that group of players reflected me, and that's such a disappointing thing, because it's you who loses your job, it's your responsibility. As much as I should have been slightly softer in my tone in some ways at Rotherham, maybe I became too soft in my tone in certain conversations at Bristol Rovers, and should have been stronger that if it's my neck on the line, we need this, we want this, that's got to happen. And yeah, it's always a balance. So 2 fantastic experiences to balance off against each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, how did the various personal challenges that you'd had in your family life, I imagine that obviously had a bearing on the back end of your stint at Bristol Rovers?
Yeah, but only at the very end.
Yeah.
And it's been well publicised in recent weeks what the family went through, and most importantly Hannah and Steve. But that was only at the end, and probably already at that point I knew the writing was on the wall. We all had a fair idea as staff and my close staff what was going to happen if we didn't win enough games at that point. Yeah, it puts everything in perspective.
Of course.
Certainly does, and gives you a better place mentally in terms of what's important and what's not important. Football is incredibly important to me and my family, but when things happen away from the game, you get a better handle on where you need to be at the important moments in life. And I certainly felt, coming out of Bristol Rovers, it gave me a chance just to take a deep breath and be there for everyone who needed me there. But I would have still liked to be working for Bristol Rovers. I'd still like to be in the manager. Any management job is a privilege, and Bristol Rovers is a fantastic football club. It's so sad for myself personally that I didn't get it where I wanted to get to. But then, similar to Rotherham, what happened since leaving Bristol Rovers, from my position, looking from the outside in, it's still difficult, still very difficult, and there's been a relegation since then, despite the transfer windows. So it's hard to look back on and ignore what happened personally, because that's still a big part of what we're going through and what the family's been through, and shaping me even more in terms of what I am sat here right now. But from a professional perspective, I can't put that in terms of any excuse in terms of where the results were. The challenge was even before that. but that gave me a valuable life lesson in terms of the balance of professional life and personal life.
Yeah, that impossible work-life balance that managers always don't find easy. I wondered, you've mentioned there's no such thing as the unicorn perfect job, and I do get that. But I also wonder, given there are various challenges that you've had at Rotherham and Bristol Rovers, do you feel like you're going to be quite careful and stringent about the interviews and the people that you speak to? Because you do kind of get associated with the clubs that you choose to manage, whether you think that's right or not. So are you going to be a bit more wary of that side of things in your future interviews?
Possibly. I'll possibly ask different questions right at the start before you either accept or join the interview process. I think I'm more experienced now to ask different questions at the start and valuable questions, and then you can probably hold each other accountable to those moments and those conversations. Something I was probably going into Rotherham short notice, and then obviously Bristol Rovers. I should have asked different questions right at the very start, but only through those experiences I've had have put me in a better position to be sat here now. We speak about a unicorn job, apart from the England job, that it doesn't exist, but it's fantastic that your name's still in the game and you're still working and there's still opportunities, and whatever comes up, you want to work with good people who are probably similar to yourself in terms of the way they see the world, let alone the game of football. Very honest people, but
with different qualities in some cases as well.
Absolutely. And I'm excited by new experiences and meeting new people, and hopefully them being in a better position. I'm the best manager I am now, sat here. It sounds strange when you're out of work and looking to get back in, but I'm the best version of myself in a management capacity right now. And I'm sure whoever I work with in the future will find that. But we'll have to find out a little bit more about each other as time goes on. And I've also learned in terms of the way I am with people. I feel I'm quite a personal person, but I've got to show more moments of real care and empathy to people who are so important, and give them the time. If I gave them the amount of time or similar amount of time that I gave the job and the personal and the family life, I'd probably be in a better position. So I'm looking forward to what's next. I'm really looking forward to meeting new people and learning new skill sets alongside them, but also making sure that team on that pitch is a fair reflection of myself and plays in a certain manner, in a certain way, and is successful.
Matt, we wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.